A woman steps off a train to meet her promised future, only to watch it vanish the moment her new husband sees her limp. Rejected, stranded, and miles from anywhere, she refuses to turn back. Instead, she walks toward the one place no one else will go, a dying ranch and a man the town has already written off. What happens next will shake an entire frontier community. If you want to see how far strength can carry someone when everything else is gone, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The train hissed to a stop in Cowboy Flats just after noon, the wheels grinding against iron rails that looked older than anyone still living in town. Clara Vance sat perfectly still in the last car, hands folded over a worn carpet bag, her traveling dress damp with sweat beneath the arms and along her spine. Arizona in late August was a furnace with no mercy. Through the smudged window, she could see the platform, weathered planks, a sagging roof, a water barrel with rust stains bleeding down its side. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and tight-lipped. 24 years old, brown hair pinned up under a simple hat, eyes that had seen too much and still hadn't learned to look away. The conductor moved down the aisle, tipping his cap to the few remaining passengers. "Cobra Flats, ma'am. End of the line for you?" "Yes." Her voice came out steady. She'd practiced that. He glanced at her bags, then at her face, and something in his expression softened. "You got someone meeting you?" "I do." He nodded, didn't press further, and moved on. Clara waited until the other passengers had shuffled off before she rose. Her left leg ached from sitting so long, the muscles stiff and uncooperative. She gripped the seat back, steadied herself, and limped toward the door. The heat hit her like a slap the moment she stepped outside. Dry, bone-deep, relentless. The kind of heat that made you wonder if the sun had a personal grudge. She stood at the top of the steps, squinting against the glare, and scanned the platform. A man stood near the station house, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a clean shirt and a hat that looked newer than anything else in sight. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand and was watching the train like he expected something specific to emerge. Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She descended the steps carefully, one hand on the railing, her gait uneven but deliberate. The man's eyes tracked her movement. She saw the exact moment he noticed the limp. His gaze dropped to her leg, lingered, then snapped back to her face. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Something that made her stomach clench. She stopped a few feet away, setting her bag down beside her boot. "Mr. Brennan?" He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he unfolded the paper in his hand. Her letter, she realized. The one she'd sent weeks ago with her photograph and a careful description of herself. He glanced at it, then at her, then back at the paper. "You didn't mention that," he said flatly. Clara kept her chin up. "Mention what?" "The leg." Her jaw tightened. "I walk fine." "Looks like you don't." Heat crawled up her neck, but she held his gaze. "I work fine. I cook. I clean. I sew. I can manage a house and more besides. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Brennan folded the letter again, slow and precise, and tucked it into his vest pocket. He didn't look angry. He didn't look anything. "I wanted a wife, not a charity case." The words landed like stones. Clara stood there, the sun beating down on her shoulders, her leg throbbing, her entire future crumbling in the space of a single breath. "I'm not asking for charity," she said quietly. "I'm offering partnership." Partnership. He said the word like it tasted bad. "Lady, I got a ranch to run. I need someone who can pull their weight, not someone I gotta worry about every time there's work to be done." "You don't know what I can do." "I know enough." He tipped his hat, a gesture so polite it felt like mockery. "Safe travels back to wherever you came from." He turned and walked away. Clara stood frozen on the platform, watching him climb into a wagon and snap the reins. The horse started forward, hooves clopping against packed dirt, and within seconds he was gone, just a cloud of dust disappearing down the road. She stood there until the dust settled, until the conductor came back outside and gave her a pitying look she wanted to claw off his face, until the station master closed the ticket window and the platform emptied out completely. Then she picked up her bag and walked. There was no hotel in Cowboy Flats. There was a boarding house, But the woman who ran it took one look at Clara and quoted a price 3 times what it should have been. Clara had just enough money left for a week's worth of meals, maybe 2 if she stretched it. Definitely not enough for a room. She bought a canteen and a tin of crackers from the general store and asked the man behind the counter if there was any work in town. He looked her up and down. What kind of work? Any kind. You a seamstress? I can sew. How about cooking? I can do that too. He scratched his jaw, considering. Widow Patterson might need help with laundry. Can't pay much, though. Where do I find her? He gave her directions to a house on the edge of town, a sagging structure with a tilted porch and laundry lines strung across the yard. Clara knocked, introduced herself, and was told the position had been filled that morning. She tried 2 more houses. One woman shut the door in her face without a word. The other offered her $1 a week to scrub floors, but only if she could start immediately and work 12-hour days. Clara took it. She worked until her hands were raw and her back screamed. She slept in a corner of the woman's kitchen, a blanket spread over hard-packed dirt, and woke before dawn to start again. By the 3rd day, she'd saved enough for another tin of crackers and a block of soap. By the 5th day, the woman told her she couldn't afford to keep her anymore. Clara didn't argue. She packed her things, thanked the woman with as much dignity as she could muster, and walked back into town. She stood in the middle of the street, bag in hand, and tried to think. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and orange, and the temperature was finally starting to drop. She had maybe $2 left. No job, no room, no prospects. A man passed her on horseback, gave her a curious look, and kept riding. A woman herding chickens into a coop glanced over and quickly looked away. Claire could feel the judgment radiating off this place like heat off stones. She thought about the train. She could probably buy a ticket back east if she sold the few pieces of jewelry she had left. Her mother's brooch, a pair of earrings. She could go back to Philadelphia, back to the boarding house where she'd spent the last 2 years, back to the women who looked at her with that same mix of pity and disdain. Or she could do something else. She walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land and asked a man repairing a fence if he knew of any ranches nearby. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Depends what you're looking for. Work. A place to stay. He snorted. You don't look like ranch stock. I'm stronger than I look. That's so. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. There's the Hale place, about 6 miles northwest. But I wouldn't bother. Why not? 'Cause Ethan Hale's as good as dead, and that ranch died with him. Clara's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Got himself sick a few weeks back. Infection or fever or something. Ain't nobody seen him since. His kid's been staying with the preacher's family, and word is they're just waiting for him to pass so they can divide up the land. He's still alive, though? The man gave her a strange look. As far as I know. But he won't be for long. Clara adjusted the strap of her bag. How do I get there? You serious? Dead serious. He pointed northwest toward a line of hills barely visible in the fading light. Follow the road past the creek, then cut west when you hit the big cottonwood. You'll see the ranch eventually, or what's left of it. Thank you. She started walking. The man called after her. You're making a mistake, lady. She didn't look back. The walk took longer than she expected. The road was rough, full of ruts and loose stones that made her limp worse with every mile. Her leg throbbed, the muscles seizing up in protest, but she kept moving. The sun sank lower, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, and by the time she reached the cottonwood tree, the first stars were beginning to appear. She turned west, following a faint trail that wound through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. The air cooled quickly, the heat of the day evaporating into a chill that made her pull her shawl tighter. She heard coyotes in the distance, their yips and howls echoing across the emptiness, and once she saw the silhouette of something large moving through the shadows. Probably a deer, she told herself, though she couldn't be sure. When she finally saw the ranch, her first thought was that the man had been right. It was dying. The house was small, single-story, with a roof that sagged in the middle and shutters hanging crooked on their hinges. The barn behind it leaned to one side like it was too tired to stand upright. A corral fence had collapsed in places, the rails lying in the dirt like broken bones. But there was a light in the window. Clara stopped at the edge of the yard, her breath coming hard, her leg on fire. She stared at that light, a faint, flickering glow that could have been a lantern or a candle, and felt something shift inside her chest. Someone was alive in there. She limped up to the door and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. She tried the handle. It wasn't locked. The door swung inward with a creak, and the smell hit her immediately. Sweat, sickness, something sour and rotten that made her stomach turn. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle on a table near the far wall. There was a fireplace, cold and empty, a chair with a broken leg, a shelf with a few tin plates and cups, and in the corner, on a narrow bed, a man lay motionless beneath a thin blanket. Clara stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She crossed the room slowly, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The man's face was turned toward the wall, his breathing shallow and uneven. She could see the fever in the way his skin glistened, the way his body trembled even under the blanket. "Sir?" She kept her voice low, careful. "Can you hear me?" He didn't respond. She set her bag down and knelt beside the bed, ignoring the protest from her leg. Up close, she could see more. Dark hair matted with sweat, a week's worth of stubble on his jaw, hollow cheeks that spoke of weight lost and strength fading. His shirt was soaked through, sticking to his chest, and when she reached out to touch his forehead, his skin was burning. "Jesus," she whispered. His eyes cracked open, unfocused and glassy. He looked at her without seeing her, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Clara pulled back the blanket and nearly gagged. His right arm was wrapped in a filthy bandage, the fabric stained dark with blood and pus. The infection had spread up past his elbow, the skin around it swollen and discolored. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. This man was dying. If she left now, he'd be dead by morning, maybe sooner. She could leave, walk back to town, tell the preacher or the doctor or whoever was supposed to care. Let someone else deal with it. But she didn't move. Instead, she stood, rolled up her sleeves, and went looking for water. There was a pump outside, rusty and stubborn, but it still worked. Clara filled a bucket and hauled it back inside, her legs screaming with every step. She found a relatively clean rag in a drawer and soaked it in the water, then returned to the bed. The man, Ethan, the fence mender had called him, was still barely conscious, his head lolling to one side. Clara pressed the wet rag to his forehead, wiping away the sweat and grime. He flinched at the touch, but didn't wake. "I'm going to help you," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "But you're going to have to stay alive long enough for me to figure out how." She peeled back the bandage on his arm, working slowly, trying not to cause more damage. The wound beneath was ugly, a deep gash that had clearly been stitched at some point, but the stitches had torn and the infection had taken hold. The flesh around it was hot and swollen, and the smell was worse up close. Clara swallowed hard. She'd seen infections before. Her father had died from one, years ago, after a logging accident back in Pennsylvania. She'd watched the doctor try to save him, watched the fever take him piece by piece until there was nothing left. She wasn't a doctor, but she'd learned a few things. She went back outside and searched the barn, finding a rusted can of kerosene and a box of matches. She boiled water over a fire she managed to coax to life in the fireplace, sterilized the sharpest knife she could find, and set to work. It took hours. She cleaned the wound as best she could, cutting away the dead tissue and draining the infection. Ethan thrashed and groaned, half delirious, and once he nearly knocked her over, but she held him down and kept going. When it was done, she wrapped his arm in clean strips of fabric torn from one of her own petticoats and forced water between his lips. By the time she finished, the sky outside was turning gray with dawn. Clara collapsed into the chair by the table, her hands shaking, her body drenched in sweat. Ethan was still breathing. That was something. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. She woke to the sound of movement. Clara jerked upright, her neck stiff, her leg numb from sitting. The room was brighter now, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the shutters. And Ethan was awake. He was sitting up, barely, one hand braced against the wall, the other clutching his bandaged arm. His eyes were open, clearer than before but filled with confusion. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was rough, scraped raw from fever. Clara stood, wincing as blood rushed back into her leg. "My name's Clara Vance." "What are you doing in my house?" "Saving your life, apparently." He stared at her, his expression somewhere between suspicion and disbelief. I didn't ask you to. You weren't exactly in a position to ask for anything. Ethan looked down at his arm, at the fresh bandage, and his jaw tightened. You did this? Unless you think it magically healed itself overnight. He didn't respond. He just sat there, breathing hard, his face pale and drawn. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. Why? Clara met his gaze, because no one else was going to. They looked at each other across the dim room, two strangers thrown together by circumstance and desperation. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and stirring the dust in the yard. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his features. You should leave. Probably. I mean it. This place is falling apart. I'm falling apart. You don't want to be here. Clara picked up the bucket and headed for the door. Lucky for you, I don't have anywhere else to go. She stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind her, and limped toward the pump. Behind her, through the thin walls, she heard Ethan let out a long, shaky breath, and for the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of work and exhaustion. Clara cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and walls, airing out the musty blankets, washing dishes that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. She cooked what little food she could find, beans, a handful of potatoes, some dried meat that was more leather than protein. She tended to Ethan's wound twice a day, changing the bandage and checking for signs of infection. He didn't thank her. He barely spoke to her, but he stopped telling her to leave. On the 4th day, he was strong enough to sit at the table while she made breakfast. She fried eggs from the 3 scrawny chickens she'd found scratching around the barn and served them with the last of the bread she'd baked the night before. Ethan ate slowly, his movements careful, like he didn't quite trust his own body yet. Clara sat across from him, sipping water from a chipped cup. You got a husband? He asked suddenly. She looked up. No. Family? Not anymore. He studied her for a moment. So what's your plan here? You just gonna stay and play nurse until I'm back on my feet, then disappear? Clara set down her cup. I don't have a plan. Everyone's got a plan. Not me. Not anymore. Ethan leaned back in his chair, wincing as the movement pulled at his arm. You came here for Brennan, didn't you? She froze. How did you? Small town. Word travels. He gave her a long look. He's an idiot. Clara's throat tightened. He's practical. He's an idiot, Ethan repeated. And if you think you're damaged goods because of that leg, you're an idiot too. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ethan pushed his plate away, half the eggs still uneaten. I've got a son, Toby. He's 7. He's staying with the preacher and his wife while I'm... He gestured vaguely at himself. Like this. When can he come home? When I'm not dying. Clara stood and started clearing the dishes. Then we'd better make sure you stop dying. He almost smiled. It was gone in a second, but she saw it. I know. By the end of the first week, Ethan was on his feet. Not for long, and not without pain, but he could walk from the bed to the table without collapsing. Clara took that as progress. She'd started working on the ranch itself, small things at first. She fixed the corral fence using spare rails she found behind the barn. She patched a hole in the roof with tar and old shingles. She weeded the sorry excuse for a vegetable garden and managed to coax a few stubborn plants back to life. Ethan watched her from the porch, his expression unreadable. You don't have to do that, he said one afternoon. Clara was on her knees in the dirt, pulling up weeds. I know. Then why are you? She sat back, wiping sweat from her forehead. Because it needs doing. That's not an answer. She looked at him, squinting against the sun. Maybe I like having something to fix. He didn't respond to that. He just turned and went back inside. That night, after supper, he asked her about Philadelphia. They were sitting outside, watching the sun set over the hills. The air was cooling, the sky streaked with pink and gold, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara felt something close to peace. What was it like? Ethan asked. Crowded, loud, dirty. You miss it? No. He glanced at her. What do you miss? Clara thought about that. I don't know, feeling like I belonged somewhere, maybe. You ever feel that? Once. A long time ago. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Fever took her. Same thing almost took me. Clara looked over at him. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. He paused. Toby doesn't remember her much. That's the worst part. He's forgetting her, and I can't. His voice cracked, and he stopped. Clara didn't push. She just waited. I gave up, Ethan said finally. After she died, I just stopped trying. Let the ranch fall apart. Let myself fall apart. If you hadn't shown up, I'd be dead by now. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. He turned to face her fully. So why'd you really stay? And don't tell me it's because you had nowhere else to go. You could have gone back to town, found work, found another man to marry. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. I stayed because I needed to prove something. Prove what? That I'm not broken. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. You're not. Something inside Clara's chest loosened, just a little. They sat together until the stars came out, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt quite so alone. The morning Ethan rode into town to bring Toby home, Clara scrubbed the kitchen floor for the 3rd time that week. Her hands were raw, her knuckles cracked and bleeding in places. But she kept working. The house had to be clean. It had to feel like a home again, not the tomb it had been when she'd first walked through that door. She heard the wagon before she saw it, the creak of wheels, the plod of hooves on hard-packed earth. She straightened, pressing one hand against her lower back, and watched through the window as Ethan pulled up to the house. A small figure sat beside him on the bench, a boy with dark hair and his father's sharp jawline. Clara's stomach knotted. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. Ethan climbed down first, moving slower than he probably wanted to, still favoring his injured arm. The boy stayed put, staring at Clara with wide, uncertain eyes. Toby, Ethan said, his voice gentler than Clara had heard it before. Come on down. The boy didn't move. It's all right. This is Miss Clara. She's been helping out while I was sick. Toby looked from his father to Clara and back again. Then, slowly, he climbed down from the wagon. He was small for 7, thin and wary, with dirt on his knees and a rip in his shirt sleeve. Clara crouched down, ignoring the sharp pull in her leg. Hi, Toby. He didn't answer, just kept staring. You hungry? She tried. I made biscuits this morning. They're still warm. I don't like biscuits, he said flatly. Ethan sighed. Toby, tea. It's fine, Clara cut in. She stood, meeting the boy's gaze. What do you like? Toby thought about it. Corn cakes. With honey. I can make those. He studied her for another long moment, then gave a small nod. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. Ethan unloaded a small bundle of clothes from the wagon and handed it to his son. Take this inside and put it in your room, then wash up for lunch. Toby took the bundle and disappeared into the house without a word. Clara watched him go, then turned to Ethan. He doesn't talk much, does he? Not lately. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. The preacher's wife said he's been quieter than usual. Won't say why. Give him time. Yeah. Ethan didn't sound convinced. Clara went back inside and started mixing batter for corn cakes. She could hear Toby moving around in the other room, the soft thud of his boots on the floor, the creak of the bed as he sat down. When he came back out, his face and hands were cleaner, though he'd missed a spot of dirt behind his ear. She set a plate in front of him, 3 corn cakes stacked high, honey drizzled over the top. He ate without looking at her, his eyes fixed on the table. Ethan sat across from him watching. You been good for the preacher and Miss Ellen? Toby shrugged. That mean yes or no? Another shrug. Use your words, son. Toby's jaw tightened. I was good. All right then. Ethan glanced at Clara, then back at his son. Things are going to be different now. Better. But you got to help out more. Miss Clara's been working herself half to death keeping this place running, and I can't do everything yet, so you'll have chores, feeding the chickens, hauling water, things like that. Understand? Toby nodded, still not meeting his father's eyes. And you'll be respectful to Miss Clara. She's a guest here, and we owe her. That got a reaction. Toby looked up sharply. Why's she here? Ethan hesitated. Clara could see him choosing his words carefully. Because she needed a place to stay, and we needed help. It worked out. Is she staying forever? I don't know. That's up to her. Toby turned his gaze on Clara, his expression unreadable. She met it head on, refusing to flinch. I'm staying as long as your dad needs me to, she said evenly. After that, we'll see. The boy stared at her for another beat, then went back to his corn cakes. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. After lunch, Ethan took Toby outside to show him what needed fixing. Clara cleaned up and then sat down at the table, suddenly exhausted. She could hear their voices through the open window, Ethan's low and patient, Toby's clipped and small. The sound of it settled something inside her, though she couldn't have said what. She closed her eyes and let herself rest. Ook. The first real trouble came on a Sunday. Clara had been at the ranch for almost 2 weeks when Ethan decided they needed supplies from town. The pantry was nearly empty, and the chickens weren't laying enough to keep them fed. He hitched the wagon, helped Clara up onto the bench, and they rode into Cowboy Flats with Toby wedged between them. The town was busier than Clara remembered, people milling around outside the general store and the church. She kept her eyes forward as Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop, but she could feel the stares. The weight of them pressed against her skin like heat. Stay close, Ethan muttered, more to Toby than to her. They climbed down and headed into the store. The owner, a balding man with a thick mustache, looked up from behind the counter and froze. His gaze flicked from Ethan to Clara and back again, and his expression shifted into something guarded. Ethan, heard you were back on your feet. More or less. Ethan pulled a list from his pocket and set it on the counter. Need to stock up. The man picked up the list, scanning it slowly. This'll take a few minutes to put together. That's fine. Clara wandered toward the back of the store, where shelves held bolts of fabric and spools of thread. She ran her fingers over a piece of calico, soft and faded, and tried to ignore the whispers starting up behind her. That her? Has to be. Heard she just showed up one day. Living out there with him? And the boy? Shameful, if you ask me. Clara's hand stilled on the fabric. She turned slowly and found 2 women standing near the front of the store, both of them watching her with barely concealed judgment. One was older, gray-haired and pinch-faced. The other was younger, pretty in a brittle kind of way. Can I help you? Clara asked, her voice cool. The older woman sniffed. Just wondering what kind of woman moves in with a man she's not married to. The kind who doesn't let him die alone, Clara shot back. The younger woman's eyebrows went up. That's not what it looks like from here. Then maybe you should look harder. Ethan appeared at her elbow, his expression dark. We done here? Clara nodded. He took her arm and steered her toward the counter, where the store owner had finished packing their supplies into crates. Ethan paid without a word, loaded the crates into the wagon, and helped Clara back up onto the bench. As they pulled away, Clara glanced back and saw the 2 women still standing in the doorway, their mouths moving in a steady stream of gossip. Ignore them, Ethan said. I'm trying. They don't know anything. They know enough to make it a problem. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. Let them talk. We're not doing anything wrong. Clara looked over at Toby, who was staring straight ahead, his face blank. She wondered how much he'd heard. They rode back to the ranch in silence. That night, after Toby had gone to bed, Clara sat on the porch with her mending. The air was cool, the sky clear and full of stars. Ethan came out and sat beside her, a tin cup of coffee in his hands. You all right? He asked. Clara threaded her needle, focusing on the tear in one of Toby's shirts. Fine. You're a terrible liar. She glanced at him. I've been called worse. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. People in this town love to talk, always have, but it doesn't mean anything. It means something to them. Let it. Clara set down the shirt, her hands falling still in her lap. You really don't care what they think. I stopped caring about a lot of things after my wife died. He paused. But I'm starting to care again. And what I care about is keeping my son safe and this ranch running. Everything else is noise. Clara looked out at the dark hills. What if the noise gets too loud? Then we'll deal with it. She wanted to believe him. She really did. The noise got louder. Over the next week, Clara noticed the looks when she went into town. The whispers that stopped when she got too close. The way certain shopkeepers refused to meet her eyes. Ethan noticed too, though he didn't say anything. Then Toby came home from town one afternoon with a split lip and a black eye. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him walking up the road, his head down, his steps slow. She dropped the sheet she'd been pinning and hurried toward him. "Toby, what happened?" He didn't answer, just kept walking. "Toby." She caught his arm, gently but firm. "Look at me." He turned and she sucked in a breath. His lip was swollen and bleeding, and the skin around his left eye was already turning purple. "Who did this?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." He pulled his arm free. "Just leave it alone." "I can't do that." "Why not? Everyone else does." He pushed past her and disappeared into the house. Clara stood there, her chest tight, her hands shaking with anger she didn't know what to do with. Ethan came around the side of the barn, saw her face, and stopped. "What's wrong?" "Toby." "Someone hit him." Ethan's expression went flat. "Where is he?" "Inside." He strode past her, his boots thudding hard against the porch. Clara followed, her heart pounding. Toby was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. Ethan crouched in front of him, his voice low and controlled. "Who was it?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." "Tell me." Toby's shoulders hunched. "Billy Tucker and his brother. They said—" His voice broke. "They said you and Miss Clara are sinners, that she's a... What did they say?" Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. "They said she's a whore." The word hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt it hit her square in the chest, stealing her breath. Ethan stood slowly, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "Did you hit them back?" Toby nodded. "Got Billy pretty good before his brother grabbed me." "Good." Ethan rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did the right thing, but from now on you stay away from them. Both of them. Understand?" Toby nodded again, his eyes wet. Ethan looked over at Clara. "I'm going into town." "Ethan, don't—" "I'm going into town," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And I'm going to have a word with Bill Tucker. His boys don't get to talk like that about people in my house. It'll just make things worse. It's already worse." He grabbed his hat and walked out. Clara heard the wagon creak as he climbed in, heard the snap of the reins, and then he was gone. She sat down beside Toby, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For making things harder for you." Toby looked at her, his good eye red-rimmed. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Doesn't matter. They're blaming me anyway." "Then they're stupid." Clara almost smiled. "Yeah, they are." They sat in silence for a while. Then Toby spoke again, quieter this time. "Are you and Pa going to get married?" Clara's breath caught. "What?" "That's what people think, that you're here because you want to marry him." "I'm here because he needed help." "But do you want to?" Clara didn't know how to answer that, so she settled for the truth. "I don't know. I haven't thought about it." Toby studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, like that was answer enough. Gots. Ethan came back 2 hours later, his knuckles bruised and his shirt torn. Clara met him at the door, her stomach in knots. "What did you do?" "Had a conversation." "With your fists?" "With my words first." He didn't want to listen. Ethan pushed past her and went to the basin, splashing water on his face. "Bill Tucker's a drunk and a coward. His boys are just like him. They won't bother Toby again." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." He turned to face her, water dripping from his chin. "Because I told him if they laid a hand on my son again, I'd burn his barn to the ground and salt his fields. And he believed me." Clara stared at him. "You can't just threaten people." "Watch me." "Ethan, what do you want me to do, Clara? Sit back and let them say whatever they want? Let them hurt my kid?" His voice rose, sharp and raw. "I won't do it. I can't." Clara crossed her arms, her own anger flaring. "And what happens when the whole town decides you're the problem? What happens when they come out here looking for a fight?" "Then I'll give them one." "That's not a solution." "Then what is?" He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Tell me." "Because I'm out of ideas." Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. Ethan exhaled hard and turned away. "I'm not letting them run you off. And I'm not letting them hurt Toby. So if that means I have to fight the whole damn town, then that's what I'll do. He walked out, leaving Clara standing in the middle of the room, her heart pounding and her mind spinning. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire. Clara watched it through the window and wondered how much longer they could hold out before everything burned down. Okay. The next few days were tense. Toby stayed close to the ranch, helping Clara with chores and avoiding town altogether. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, fixing fences and clearing brush, his movements sharp and restless. Clara threw herself into cooking and cleaning, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind off the growing storm. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the preacher showed up. Clara was in the garden when she heard the horse. She looked up and saw a tall, thin man in a black coat dismounting near the house. Ethan came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Reverend," he said, his tone neutral. The preacher nodded. "Ethan, got a minute?" "Depends what for." The preacher glanced at Clara, then back at Ethan. "Maybe we should talk inside." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he gestured toward the house. "After you." Clara stood frozen in the garden, her stomach sinking. She watched them disappear through the door, then forced herself back to work. Whatever was about to happen, she couldn't stop it. 10 minutes later, the preacher came back out, his expression grim. Ethan followed, his face like stone. The preacher mounted his horse and looked down at Ethan. "Think about what I said." "I heard you just fine." "Then think about it anyway, for Toby's sake." He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Ethan stood there, hands on his hips, staring after him. Clara set down her trowel and walked over. "What did he want?" Ethan didn't look at her. "He said the town's talking, said people are concerned about the situation here." "What situation?" "You and me, living under the same roof, unmarried." He spat the word like it tasted bad. "He suggested it might be better if you found somewhere else to stay." Clara's hands curled into fists. "And what did you say?" "I told him to mind his own business." "Ethan, I mean it, Clara. This is my house, my land, and I'll decide who stays and who goes." He finally looked at her, his eyes hard. "You want to leave? That's your choice. But I'm not throwing you out because a bunch of self-righteous hypocrites don't like it." Clara's throat tightened. "They're going to keep pushing. Let them." "What if they go after Toby again?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Then I'll handle it." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that fighting wasn't always the answer, that sometimes you had to bend before you broke. But she could see the set of his shoulders, the way his hands had balled into fists, and she knew he wouldn't listen. So instead, she just nodded. "All right." He searched her face for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the barn. Clara watched him go, her chest aching with something she couldn't name. She went back to the garden and kept working, even as the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down like a weight. She had nowhere else to go. And even if she did, she wasn't sure she'd take it. Good. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay on the cot in the corner of the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. She could hear Toby's soft breathing from the other room, the creak of Ethan shifting in his bed. She thought about the preacher's visit, about the women in the store, about the way this town had already decided who she was without ever asking. She'd spent her whole life trying to prove she was more than what people saw, more than the limp, more than the broken pieces. And here she was, doing it all over again. Maybe she should leave, pack her bag, walk back to town, find another place that didn't know her name, start over somewhere new. But the thought of it made her chest hurt. She sat up, swinging her legs off the cot, and padded quietly to the door. Outside, the night was cool and still, the stars bright against the black sky. She stepped onto the porch and found Ethan already there, leaning against the railing. He glanced over. "Can't sleep either?" "No." They stood in silence for a while. Then Ethan spoke, his voice low. "You know, after my wife died, I thought about leaving. Selling this place, taking Toby somewhere new, but I couldn't do it. This land's all I got left of her, all Toby's got." Clara leaned against the railing beside him. "You ever regret staying?" "Every damn day." He paused. "But I'd regret leaving more." Clara looked out at the dark hills. "I don't belong here." "You think I do?" She turned to him, surprised. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression. "I'm a widower with a half-dead ranch and a kid who barely talks to me," he said quietly. "I don't fit in this town any more than you do, but I'm still here, and so are you. For now. That's all any of us got, for now." He straightened, his hand brushing against hers on the railing. "Stay, Clara. At least until we figure out what comes next." She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that staying was possible, that they could weather whatever storm was coming, but the fear was still there, cold and heavy in her gut. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Ethan nodded. "That's all I'm asking." They stood together under the stars, two broken people trying to hold on to something fragile and uncertain. And for tonight, at least, that was enough. Maoke. The breaking point came on a Saturday. Claire was in town with Ethan, picking up a few last-minute supplies before heading back to the ranch. They just left the general store when a voice called out behind them. "Hail!" Ethan turned. A man was striding toward them, broad-shouldered, red-faced, with a swagger that spoke of too much confidence and too little sense. Clara recognized him from the store. "Bill Tucker. Heard you had something to say to me the other day," Tucker said, stopping a few feet away. "Thought maybe we should settle it proper." Ethan's expression went cold. "We already settled it." "Don't think we did." Tucker's gaze slid to Clara, and his lip curled. "You still got your whore living with you?" The word hit like a slap. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, but before she could respond, Ethan stepped between them. "Say that again," he said quietly. Tucker grinned. "You heard me." Ethan hit him. It happened so fast, Clara barely registered it. 1 second Tucker was standing there smirking, the next he was on the ground, blood pouring from his nose. Ethan stood over him, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. "Get up," Ethan growled. Tucker scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage. He swung wildly, catching Ethan on the jaw. Ethan staggered, but didn't go down. He came back swinging, and suddenly they were a tangle of fists and fury, crashing into the side of a building. People started gathering, men shouting, women gasping. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding, as the two men beat each other bloody. Finally, someone pulled them apart. The blacksmith, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, grabbed Ethan and hauled him back. Another man did the same with Tucker. "Enough!" the blacksmith barked. "Both of you, knock it off!" Ethan was breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Tucker looked worse. His nose was definitely broken, and his lip was split wide open. The preacher pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "What in heaven's name is going on here?" Tucker spat blood onto the dirt. "He attacked me, for no reason." "That's a lie," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He insulted me, called me—" "I don't care what he called you," the preacher cut in. "Violence solves nothing." Ethan jerked free of the blacksmith's grip. "You want to talk about violence? Talk to him. Talk to his boys, who beat my son bloody for defending her." The crowd murmured. The preacher's expression tightened. "Ethan, this has to stop. You can't keep—" "Keep what? Standing up for people when this town tears them down?" Ethan's voice rose, sharp and furious. "You want me to just roll over? Let them say whatever they want?" "I want you to think about your son." "I'm thinking about my son. I'm thinking about what kind of man I'm teaching him to be, and I'll be damned if I'm teaching him to stand by while people hurt the ones he cares about." The preacher opened his mouth, but Ethan wasn't done. "You all want to judge her?" He gestured at Clara, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "Fine, judge away. But before you do, ask yourselves this. How many of you would have walked into a dying man's house and saved his life? How many of you would have stayed and worked yourself to the bone for nothing, because that's what she did? And if that makes her a whore in your eyes, then maybe you need to take a long, hard look at yourselves." Silence fell. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping, feet shuffling. Tucker sneered. "Pretty speech. Doesn't change what she is." Ethan took a step toward him, but the blacksmith blocked his path. "That's enough, Ethan. Go home." Ethan stared at Tucker for a long, hard moment. Then he turned, took Claire's arm, and walked her back to the wagon. They rode out of town in silence, the stares burning into their backs. Clara didn't speak until they were halfway home. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. They're never going to let this go." I don't care. Clara looked over at him. His jaw was swelling, his knuckles bruised and raw. He looked exhausted and furious and something else she couldn't quite name. Why? She asked quietly. Ethan glanced at her. Why what? Why fight for me? You barely know me. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because you fought for me first. Clara's throat tightened. She turned her face away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the sun sinking low behind them, and Clara realized with a jolt of clarity that she wasn't leaving. Not yet, maybe not ever. Whatever happened next, she was in this now, all the way. When they got back to the ranch, Toby was waiting on the porch. He took one look at his father's face, and his eyes went wide. What happened? Nothing, Ethan said, climbing down from the wagon. He moved stiffly, wincing as his boots hit the ground. Just a disagreement. With who? Bill Tucker. Toby's expression darkened. Because of what his boys said? Something like that. Ethan headed toward the house, but Toby caught his arm. Pa, wait. Did you win? Ethan looked down at his son, and for the first time since they'd left town, something like a smile ghosted across his face. Nobody wins fights like that, Toby, but I didn't lose either. Toby seemed to consider that. Then he nodded, satisfied, and let go of his father's arm. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair and went inside. Clara stayed by the wagon, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. She felt shaky, unsteady, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted and she hadn't found her balance yet. Toby walked over to her. You okay, Miss Clara? She looked at him, this small, serious boy who'd been through too much already. I don't know. Pa meant what he said, in town. I know. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. Clara's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Toby kicked at the dirt with the toe of his boot. I'm glad you're here, even if other people aren't. The words hit her square in the chest. She reached out and squeezed his shoulder, just once, and he gave her a quick, shy smile before disappearing into the house. Clara stood alone in the yard as the sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, she let herself cry. Geet. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of voices outside. She sat up on her cot, disoriented, and listened. Men's voices. More than one. She pulled on her dress and shoes as quickly as she could and stepped outside. 3 men on horseback were clustered near the barn, talking to Ethan. One of them was the blacksmith. Another was a rancher Clara had seen in town a few times. The third was younger, maybe in his 20s, with a nervous energy that made her uneasy. Ethan saw her and his expression tightened, but he didn't send her back inside. She walked over, ignoring the stares. Morning, the blacksmith said, tipping his hat. Didn't mean to wake you, ma'am. What's going on? Clara asked. Ethan crossed his arms. They're here to talk. About what? The older rancher shifted in his saddle. About yesterday, and about the situation here. Clara's pulse quickened. What situation? The blacksmith cleared his throat. Look, nobody's trying to cause trouble, but there's been a lot of talk since yesterday, and some folks think, well, they think maybe it'd be better if things were more official. Official? Clara repeated slowly. Between you and Ethan, the younger man blurted out. People are saying you two should get married. Make it proper. Clara felt the color drain from her face. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. That's none of your business, Ethan said coldly. Maybe not, the blacksmith said, but it's becoming the town's business whether you like it or not. The preacher's getting pressure from the church council. Bill Tucker's stirring people up, saying you attacked him unprovoked. There's talk of bringing in the marshal to settle things. The marshal, Ethan said flatly. For what? I defended someone who was being insulted. That's not how Tucker's telling it. Ethan took a step closer to the horses, his hands balling into fists. So what are you suggesting? That I marry Clara just to shut people up? The older rancher spoke up. We're suggesting that if you two are serious about staying here, you might want to think about what's best for your boy. And for yourselves. Don't talk to me about what's best for my son. Ethan, we're trying to help, then help by leaving. Ethan's voice was sharp as broken glass. Get off my land, now. The 3 men exchanged glances. The blacksmith sighed, shaking his head. Think about it, Ethan. That's all we're saying. They turned their horses and rode off. Clara and Ethan stood in the yard, watching them disappear down the road. They want us to get married, Clara said quietly, almost to herself. They want us to fall in line. Ethan turned to face her, his expression stormy. I'm not doing something that important just because a bunch of hypocrites think I should. I wasn't suggesting you should. Good. Because this is insane. He paced a few steps, then stopped. Marriage isn't something you do to make other people happy. It's supposed to mean something. Clara's chest ached. I know. He looked at her, his eyes searching. Do you? Because I need to know you understand that I'm not, that I wouldn't. I understand, Clara said gently. You're not going to marry me out of obligation. I get it. Ethan exhaled hard, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I'm sorry they put you in this position. You didn't do anything wrong. I started a fight in the middle of town. I'd say that qualifies. You defended me. And now everyone thinks we're... He stopped himself, shaking his head. This is a mess. Clara couldn't argue with that. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. Maybe I should leave after all, before this gets worse. No. The word came out hard and immediate. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze fierce. You're not leaving because of them. If you leave, it's because you want to, not because they're making your life hell. What if staying makes your life hell? It already is. Has been for 3 years. You didn't make it worse, Clara. You made it bearable. Her breath caught. She stared at him, unable to form a response. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. Just don't make any decisions yet. Give it a few days. Let things cool down. Clara nodded slowly. All right. All right. They stood there for another moment, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Then Ethan turned and headed toward the barn, and Clara went back inside to start breakfast. But the conversation with the 3 men stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Marriage. The word felt heavy, impossible. She barely knew Ethan, and yet some part of her, some small quiet part, wondered what it would be like if they did. She pushed the thought away and focused on frying eggs. Over the next few days, an uneasy quiet settled over the ranch. Ethan threw himself into work with a vengeance, repairing fences and clearing brush like he was trying to outrun something. Toby stayed close to Clara, helping her with chores and asking questions about everything from how to make bread to why chickens couldn't fly. Clara welcomed the distraction. It kept her from thinking too much about the town, about the whispers, about the impossible situation she'd landed in. On the 4th day, a wagon rolled up to the house just before noon. Clara looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. It was the preacher. Ethan must have seen him too, because he came striding out of the barn, his expression dark. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. The preacher climbed down from the wagon, his face grave. Ethan, Miss Vance, can we talk? Thought we already did, Ethan said. This is different. How? The preacher pulled an envelope from his coat and held it out. The church council met yesterday. They've made a decision. Ethan didn't take the envelope. What kind of decision? They're asking you to marry Miss Vance within the next 2 weeks, or she'll need to find other accommodations. And if she doesn't leave voluntarily, they'll petition the marshal to remove her from the property on grounds of moral indecency. Clara felt like she'd been punched. They can't do that. The preacher looked at her with something like sympathy. I'm afraid they can. The town has bylaws about cohabitation outside of marriage. They're rarely enforced, but in this case, they're making an exception, Ethan finished coldly, because people like Bill Tucker are pushing for it. I don't agree with it, the preacher said quietly, but I'm outnumbered. I came here to warn you, not to threaten you. Ethan took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. 2 weeks. Yes, and if we refuse, then the marshal will come, and things will get worse for both of you. Claire's mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. They were being backed into a corner, forced to choose between marriage and public humiliation. Maybe worse. Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Tell the council I'll think about it. The preacher nodded. That's all I can ask. He climbed back into his wagon and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Clara and Ethan stood in the yard, the envelope hanging between them like a live grenade. 2 weeks, Clara said numbly. Yeah. They're really going to do this. Yeah. Clara turned to face him. What do we do? Ethan looked at the envelope, then at her. I don't know. She could see the conflict in his eyes, anger and frustration and something deeper, something that looked almost like fear. He didn't want to be forced into this any more than she did. We could fight it, Clara said. Refuse. See what happens. And if the marshal comes? If they drag you out of here in front of Toby? Clara flinched. She hadn't thought about that. Ethan crumpled the envelope in his fist. I'm not letting them do that to you. So what? We get married? Because they're making us? I don't know. His voice cracked, raw and frustrated. I don't have all the answers, Clara. I'm just trying to keep everyone safe. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that marriage wasn't the solution, that there had to be another way. But looking at him, at the exhaustion written into every line of his face, the weight he was carrying, she couldn't bring herself to push. Instead, she said quietly, We have 2 weeks. Let's use them to figure this out. Ethan nodded, his shoulders sagging. Yeah, okay. He walked back to the barn and Clara went inside. She sank into a chair at the table and put her head in her hands. Marriage. To a man she'd known for less than a month. A man who was still grieving his wife, still trying to hold his life together. A man who didn't love her and probably never would. The thought made her chest ache in ways she didn't want to examine. That night, Clara couldn't sleep again. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, her mind turning over the same impossible questions. What would marriage to Ethan even look like? Would he resent her for it? Would Toby? She heard footsteps and turned her head. Ethan was standing in the doorway, backlit by moonlight. You awake? He asked quietly. Yeah. He hesitated, then stepped inside. Can we talk? Clara sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. About what? About the elephant in the room. He dragged the chair over and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. If we're really considering this, we need to be honest with each other. Clara's pulse quickened. All right. Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. I love my wife. I still do, in a way. And I can't promise you that kind of love. Not now. Maybe not ever. The words stung, but Clara appreciated the honesty. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking for? Clara thought about that. What did she want? Safety? A place to belong? Something more? I want respect, she said finally. I want to be treated like a partner, not a burden. And I want Toby to be okay with this. If he's not, then it doesn't matter what the town says. Ethan nodded slowly. Fair enough. What else? She stopped, the words catching in her throat. What? Clara met his eyes. I want to know that if we do this, it's because we're choosing it, not because we're being forced. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, I can't give you love. Not yet. But I can give you partnership and protection and a home if you want one. Claire's chest tightened. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even close. But it was real, and it was honest, and maybe that was enough. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. If we do this, we do it on our terms, not theirs. Ethan's expression softened. Agreed. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the decision settling over them. Then Ethan stood, pushing the chair back. Get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow. Clara nodded, and he left, closing the door quietly behind him. She lay back down, her heart pounding. She had no idea if they were making the right choice. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had some control over her own life. And that, at least, was something. Max. The next morning, Ethan sat Toby down and told him what was happening. Clara stayed in the kitchen, giving them privacy, but she could hear their voices through the thin walls. The town's putting pressure on us, Ethan said. They want me and Miss Clara to get married. There was a pause, then Toby asked, Do you want to? I don't know yet, but I wanted to hear what you think. Another pause. Clara held her breath. I like her, Toby said finally. She's nice, and she makes good corn cakes. Ethan let out a soft laugh. That she does. Would she be my ma? Clara's breath caught. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart aching. Not like your real ma, Ethan said gently. Nobody could replace her. But Clara would be part of our family. If you're okay with that. Toby was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Okay. You sure? Yeah, I think it'd be good. For you, I mean. You're not as sad when she's around. Clara heard Ethan's voice crack. Thanks, buddy. She turned away from the door, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't expected Toby's approval to hit her so hard, but it did. When Ethan came back into the kitchen, he found her wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. He stopped in the doorway. You heard? Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Ethan crossed the room and stood in front of her. He's a smart kid. He is. And he's right. I'm not as sad when you're around. Clara looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. Ethan, I'm not saying I love you, he said quickly. I'm not ready for that. But I do care about you, and I want you to stay. Not because the town says so, because I'm asking you to. Clara's heart felt like it might burst. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Then I'll stay. Ethan exhaled, relief flooding his face. Okay. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Clara realized with a jolt that this was real. They were really doing this. She just hoped they could survive whatever came next. The announcement went out 3 days later. Ethan rode into town and told the preacher they'd agree to the church council's terms. The wedding would take place in 10 days. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people seemed relieved, like a crisis had been averted. Others looked skeptical, like they didn't believe the marriage was real. And a few, like Bill Tucker, looked outright hostile. Clara didn't care. She had bigger things to worry about. She had no dress, no flowers, no guests she actually wanted there. The whole thing felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. Ethan seemed to feel the same way. He moved through the days with a kind of grim determination, fixing up the house and making sure everything was in order. He didn't talk much about the wedding itself. Neither did Clara. Toby, on the other hand, seemed almost excited. He asked Clara a dozen questions a day. What would she wear? Would there be cake? Could he stand with them during the ceremony? Clara answered as best she could, trying to match his enthusiasm even when she felt none herself. 2 days before the wedding, a woman showed up at the ranch. Clara was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon. She looked up and saw a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes climbing down. Miss Vance? The woman called. Clara set down the laundry basket. Yes? I'm Ellen Harper, the preacher's wife. I thought you might need some help getting ready. Clara blinked. Help? Ellen smiled. For the wedding, you'll need a dress, won't you? Clara looked down at herself, at the plain, work-worn dress she'd been living in for weeks. I don't have one. I figured as much. That's why I'm here. Ellen gestured to the wagon. I brought a few options. They're not fancy, but they're clean and they'll fit well enough. Clara felt her eyes prickle with unexpected tears. Why are you doing this? Ellen's expression softened. Because I remember what it's like to feel alone. And because I think you're braver than most people give you credit for. Clara didn't know what to say. She just nodded and followed Ellen to the wagon. They spent the next hour trying on dresses. Most of them were too big or too small, but finally they found one that fit. A simple ivory dress with long sleeves and a high collar. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and whole, and when Clara looked at herself in the small mirror Ellen had brought, she barely recognized the woman staring back. You look beautiful, Ellen said quietly. Clara's throat tightened. Thank you. Ellen packed up the other dresses and climbed back into the wagon. Before she left, she turned to Clara. I know this isn't how you imagined getting married, but for what it's worth, I think Ethan's a good man, and I think you two might surprise each other. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Ellen drove off, and Clara stood in the yard, clutching the dress to her chest. She didn't know if Ellen was right, but she hoped so. Masked. The night before the wedding, Clara sat on the porch with Ethan. The air was cool, the stars bright overhead. Neither of them had said much all evening. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. You nervous? Clara let out a shaky laugh, terrified. Yeah, me too. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Clara said, "Do you ever think about what your wife would say about all this?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. Every day. "And I think she'd tell me to stop being an idiot and take care of myself. And Toby," he paused, "I think she'd like you." Clara's chest ached. "You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it. She was practical, strong. She didn't put up with nonsense. You remind me of her in some ways." Clara didn't know if that was a compliment or not, but it felt like one. "What about you?" Ethan asked. "You ever been close to getting married before?" Clara shook her head. "No, there was a man once, back in Philadelphia, but when he found out about my leg, he changed his mind. Then he was a fool." Clara smiled despite herself. "Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely." Ethan looked over at her. "You're strong, Clara. Stronger than you think. And tomorrow, when we stand up in front of all those people, I want you to remember that. You're not doing this because you're desperate. You're doing it because you're brave." Clara's eyes stung. "I don't feel brave." "That's what makes it brave." They sat together under the stars, and Clara let herself believe just for a moment that maybe this could work. That maybe they could build something real out of all this chaos. Tomorrow, she'd find out if she was right. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Clara woke with her stomach in knots, her hands shaking as she dressed. Ellen had brought a few flowers from her garden, simple wildflowers that Clara pinned into her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time and barely recognized the woman staring back. Ethan was already dressed when she came out, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar. Toby stood beside him, scrubbed clean and wearing his Sunday best. "You look nice," Toby said shyly. Clara managed to smile. "So do you." Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a moment the world seemed to still. "Ready?" Clara took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." They climbed into the wagon and rode into town. The church was small, the pews mostly empty. A few people had shown up: Ellen and the preacher, the blacksmith and his wife, a handful of others. Bill Tucker was notably absent, which Clara took as a small mercy. The ceremony was brief. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, and Clara tried to focus on the words, but her heart was pounding too hard. When it came time for the vows, Ethan's hand was steady in hers. "I, Ethan Hale, take you, Clara Vance, to be my wife. I promise to respect you, protect you, and stand by you for as long as we both shall live." Clara's voice shook as she repeated the words. "I, Clara Vance, take you, Ethan Hale, to be my husband. I promise to respect you, support you, and stand by you for as long as we both shall live." The preacher smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Ethan hesitated, then leaned in and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to Clara's lips. It was over in a second, but Clara felt it all the way to her toes. And just like that, she was married. They signed the registry, shook hands with the few guests, and climbed back into the wagon. As they rode out of town, Clara glanced back at the church one last time. She had no idea what she'd just done, but there was no going back now. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped her down from the wagon. Toby ran ahead, disappearing into the house. Clara stood in the yard, still clutching the wildflowers, and looked at Ethan. "So," she said, "what now?" Ethan looked at the house, then back at her. "Now we figure out how to live with what we just did." Clara nodded. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't even particularly hopeful, but it was honest, and for now, that was enough. They stood there for a moment longer, the silence stretching between them like a road neither knew how to cross. Then Ethan cleared his throat and headed toward the barn, and Clara went inside to start dinner. The first week of marriage was strange. Not bad exactly, but strange. They moved around each other carefully, like two people learning to dance who kept stepping on each other's toes. Ethan slept in his room. Clara kept her cot in the kitchen. They didn't talk about it. Toby seemed the most comfortable with the arrangement. He started calling Clara Miss Clara less and just Clara more, which felt like progress. He asked her to help him with his reading in the evenings, and she had, sitting beside him at the table while Ethan worked on mending harnesses or sharpening tools. On the 8th night, Clara was washing dishes when Ethan came in from outside. He'd been working on the well, trying to fix a leak that had been dripping for weeks. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were filthy. "Got it working," he said, pumping water at the sink to wash up. "Should hold for a while." "That's good." He dried his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "You settling in all right?" Clara set down the plate she'd been scrubbing. "I think so." "You think so, or you know so?" She turned to face him. "It's different, being married, even when it's like this." Ethan's expression softened. "Yeah, I know. Do you regret it?" The question hung between them. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "No," he said finally. "Do you?" Clara thought about it, about the weeks she'd spent here, the work she'd put into this place, the way Toby had started to trust her, about the man standing in front of her who'd fought half the town just to defend her name. "No," she said. "I don't." Something shifted in Ethan's face. He nodded, then pushed off the counter. "Good. That's good." He left the kitchen, and Clara went back to the dishes, her heart beating a little faster than it should. Bullshit. The trouble started again 2 weeks after the wedding. Clara was in town buying flour when she overheard two women talking in hushed voices near the dry goods section. She recognized them, the same two who'd confronted her in the store weeks earlier. "Married or not, it's still shameful," the older one was saying. "Everyone knows he only did it to keep the marshal away. And she only did it to secure a roof over her head," the younger one added. "Poor Ethan, trapped with a woman he doesn't even love." Claire's hands tightened on the bag of flour. She wanted to walk away, to ignore them like Ethan had told her to, but something inside her snapped. She turned and walked right up to them. "If you're going to gossip about me, at least have the decency to do it when I'm not standing 10 feet away." Both women's faces went red. The older one recovered first, lifting her chin. "We're simply concerned about Ethan and that poor boy." "No, you're not. You're bored and looking for something to talk about. And since I'm an easy target, here we are." "Well, I never, Yeah, you never," Clara cut in. "You never walked miles in the heat to save a dying man. You never scrubbed floors until your hands bled. You never put yourself on the line for someone you barely knew. So maybe keep your opinions about my marriage to yourself." She turned and walked to the counter, her pulse racing. The store owner gave her an approving nod as he tallied up her purchase. Clara paid, grabbed her flour, and walked out with her head high. But her hands were shaking. When she got back to the wagon, Ethan was loading supplies into the bed. He took one look at her face and frowned. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Clara?" She set the flour down harder than she meant to. "Just the usual, people talking. I told them off." Ethan's jaw tightened. What did they say? "Does it matter? It's all the same. We got married for the wrong reasons. You're trapped. I'm using you. Pick your poison." "They don't know anything." "They think they do." Claire climbed up onto the wagon bench. "Can we just go?" Ethan studied her for another moment, then climbed up beside her and snapped the reins. They rode in tense silence for the first mile. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You know it's not true, right? What they're saying." Clara stared at the road ahead. "Which part?" "All of it. I'm not trapped. You're not using me." "Then what are we doing?" "We're surviving. Together. That's more than most people can say." Clara wanted to believe him, but the words from those women had burrowed under her skin, and she couldn't shake them loose. When they got home, she threw herself into work, scrubbing, cooking, anything to keep her hands and mind busy. But that night, lying on her cot, she couldn't stop thinking about what they'd said. What if they were right? What if Ethan did feel trapped? What if she'd pushed herself into a life that didn't really want her? She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to sleep. It didn't come easy. In fact, the breaking point came 3 days later when Toby came home from town with more than just bruises this time. Clara was kneading bread dough when she heard the wagon. She glanced out the window and saw Ethan carrying Toby toward the house. The boy's head was lolling, his shirt torn and bloody. Clara's heart stopped. She dropped the dough and ran outside. "What happened?" "Tucker's boys again," Ethan said, his voice tight and furious. "Found him on the road. They jumped him. 3 against 1. Clara's stomach turned. "How bad is he hurt?" "Bad enough." They got Toby inside and laid him on his bed. Clara fetched water and cleaned cloths while Ethan carefully peeled off the boy's shirt. There were bruises blooming across his ribs, a gash on his forehead, and his nose looked broken. "Toby," Clara said gently, pressing a wet cloth to his forehead. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Clara? I'm here. You're safe now. They said you and Pa aren't really married, that it's all fake." Clara's chest tightened. "Don't listen to them. They said Pa is going to leave you as soon as the town stops watching. Toby, that's not true. How do you know?" His voice cracked, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. "How do you know he won't?" Clara looked at Ethan, who stood frozen by the door, his face pale. "Because I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said, his voice rough. He crossed to the bed and crouched down beside his son. "You hear me, Toby? I'm not leaving Clara, and she's not leaving us. We're a family now. I don't care what those boys said." Toby searched his father's face. "Promise?" "I promise." The boy's eyes slid shut, exhausted. Clara finished cleaning his wounds while Ethan sat beside him, one hand resting on Toby's shoulder. When she was done, she and Ethan moved to the kitchen. Ethan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "This has to stop," he said quietly. "I know. No, I mean it. This ends now." He looked up at her, his eyes blazing. "I'm going to the marshal. I'm filing a complaint against Bill Tucker and his boys. They assaulted my son. That's a crime." Clara's pulse quickened. "Ethan, if I do that, maybe they'll finally leave us alone. Or maybe it'll make things worse. But I can't just sit here and let them hurt Toby. What if the marshal doesn't believe you? Then I'll make him believe me." Clara could see the determination in his face, the steel in his spine. He'd already made up his mind. "All right," she said. "Then I'm coming with you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. If we're doing this, we're doing it together." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Together." They rode into town the next morning, leaving Toby with Ellen Harper. The marshal's office was a small building near the edge of town, dusty and cramped. Marshal Garrett was a stocky man in his 50s with a graying beard and a face that had seen too much. He looked up when they walked in. "Ethan, Mrs. Hale, what can I do for you?" Ethan set his hat on the desk. "I want to file a complaint. Bill Tucker's sons assaulted my boy yesterday." Garrett leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact. Toby's got a broken nose and bruises all over. 3 boys jumped him on the road." "You got witnesses?" "Toby's the witness." Garrett scratched his beard. "The word of a 7-year-old against 3 older boys. That's not much to go on." Clara stepped forward. "Those same boys attacked him weeks ago, beat him bloody for defending me. This isn't the first time." "And did you report it then?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "No, I handled it myself." "By getting into a fistfight with Bill Tucker in the middle of town?" Garrett's tone was dry. "Yeah, I heard about that. He insulted my wife." "I'm sure he did, but that doesn't give you the right to take the law into your own hands." Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. "So what? I'm supposed to just let them keep coming after my family? Let them beat my son into the ground while you sit here and do nothing?" Garrett's eyes hardened. "Watch your tone, Ethan. I'm trying to help you here." "Then help me. Arrest those boys." "I can't arrest them without proof." "I just gave you proof." "You gave me your son's word." "That's not the same thing." Garrett stood, his hands spread on the desk. "Look, I'll talk to Bill Tucker, see what his boys have to say, but unless I get solid evidence, my hands are tied." Ethan's fists clenched. "This is a waste of time." "Maybe, but it's the best I can offer." Ethan grabbed his hat and stormed out. Clara followed, her heart sinking. Outside, Ethan paced in tight circles, his breathing harsh. "They're not going to do anything. You know that, right? Tucker's got half this town in his pocket. The marshal's not going to touch him." "So what do we do?" Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her. "We protect Toby. Keep him close. Don't let him go to town alone." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Clara's chest ached. "Ethan, we can't live like this forever." "Then what do you suggest?" She didn't have an answer. They stood there in the dusty street, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Finally, Clara said, "Maybe we should leave. Go somewhere new, start over." Ethan's head snapped up. Leave. Why not? There's nothing keeping us here. The town hates us. The land's barely hanging on. We could go somewhere people don't know us. Somewhere Toby would be safe. Ethan stared at her like she'd suggested they burn the ranch to the ground. This is my home. My wife is buried here. I know, but nothing. His voice was hard. I'm not running. I'm not letting them win. It's not about winning, Ethan. It's about survival. And I say we survive here, on our land, in our home. He stepped closer, his eyes fierce. I won't abandon this place. I can't. Clara saw the pain behind the anger, the fear he was trying so hard to bury. She reached out and touched his arm. Okay, we'll stay. Ethan's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I know. They stood together in the street, and Clara wondered how much more they could take before something broke. I'm sick. That night, Clara sat on the porch while Ethan put Toby to bed. The boy was still sore, his face swollen and bruised, but he was healing. Clara told herself that was enough. Ethan came out and sat beside her, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. He took a long pull, then offered it to her. Clara hesitated, then took it and drank. The burn felt good. I've been thinking, Ethan said. About what? About what you said. Leaving. He took the bottle back, staring at it. Part of me thinks you're right. That maybe we should just pack up and go. Find a place where people don't look at us like we're criminals. But you won't. No, I won't. He looked over at her. Is that selfish? Clara thought about it. Maybe, but it's also human. This place is part of you. I get that. Do you? Yeah, I do. She paused. I never had a place like this. Somewhere that felt like mine. But I think if I did, I'd fight for it too. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm glad you're here. Clara's breath caught. Yeah? Yeah. I know this isn't what you signed up for. The fighting, the gossip, all of it. But I'm glad you stayed. Clara's throat tightened. Me too. They sat together in the dark, passing the bottle back and forth. And for a little while, the weight of everything felt a little lighter. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of horses. She sat up, her heart pounding, and looked out the window. 4 men on horseback were riding up to the house. She recognized the marshal. The other 3 looked like deputies. She scrambled to her feet and ran to wake Ethan. He was already up, pulling on his boots. I heard, he said. They went outside together. The marshal dismounted, his expression grim. Morning, Ethan, Mrs. Hale. What's this about? Ethan asked. Got a report last night. Bill Tucker claims you threatened him, said you told him you'd burn his barn and salt his fields. Ethan's face went carefully blank. I might have said something like that. That's a serious threat. He's lucky I stopped at words. Garrett sighed. Ethan, you're not making this easy. Good. I don't want to make it easy. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me, just for questioning. Clara's stomach dropped. You're arresting him? Not yet, but I need to hear his side of things. Ethan's jaw tightened. Fine. Let's get this over with. Ethan, no! Clara grabbed his arm. He turned to her, his expression softening. It's all right. I'll be back in a few hours. What if you're not? Then you take care of Toby, and you keep this place running. You hear me? Clara's eyes burned. Don't do this. I don't have a choice. He squeezed her hand, then pulled away and mounted his horse. Clara stood in the yard, watching as the marshal and his deputies led Ethan away. Toby came out onto the porch, his eyes wide. Where's Pa going? Clara swallowed hard. He'll be back soon. But she wasn't sure she believed it. Ethan didn't come back that day. Or the next. On the 3rd day, Clara rode into town, leaving Toby with Ellen. She marched straight to the marshal's office and found Garrett behind his desk. Where is he? Garrett looked up, weary. He's in a cell. For what? Talking? For making threats. And for assault. Bill Tucker filed charges for the fight in the street. Clara's hands shook. This is insane. You know Tucker's lying. Maybe. But I've got witnesses who say Ethan threw the first punch. Because Tucker called me a whore. Garrett flinched. I know, and I'm sorry, but the law's the law. Then the law's broken. Clara leaned on the desk, her voice shaking. You're letting that man destroy us because he's got money and friends, and you know it. Garrett's face hardened. I'm doing my job. Your job is to protect people, but you're only protecting the ones who can pay you to. Get out of my office, Mrs. Hale. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. Then she turned and walked out. She stood in the street, her mind racing. Ethan was in jail. Toby was asking questions she couldn't answer, and the ranch was falling apart without him. She had to do something, but what? She walked to the general store and found the owner restocking shelves. He looked up when she came in, his expression guarded. Mrs. Hale, I need to know something, Claire said. Does Bill Tucker have debts? The man blinked. Excuse me. Debts. Money he owes. Anyone he's crossed. She stepped closer. I know you hear things. Everyone in this town hears things. He hesitated, then glanced around to make sure they were alone. He owes the bank. Has for years. And there's talk that he's been skimming from the cattle sales. Clara's pulse quickened. Who would know about that? The ranchers. The ones he sells to. Would they testify? Against Tucker? The man shook his head. Not unless they had a damn good reason. Clara's mind was spinning. What if they did? The man studied her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Clara said slowly, that if Tucker's going down, he's taking everyone with him. And maybe some of those people would rather see him gone than risk their own necks. The man's eyebrows went up. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Hale. I don't have a choice. She left the store and spent the rest of the day riding to ranches outside town, talking to men who'd done business with Bill Tucker. Most of them slammed the door in her face, but a few listened, and a few of those admitted that Tucker had cheated them. By the time she got back to town, the sun was setting. She went straight to the marshal's office and found Garrett locking up for the night. I've got 3 ranchers willing to testify that Bill Tucker's been stealing from them, she said without preamble. Garrett stopped, his hand on the door. What? Cattle sales. He's been skimming profits for years. They'll testify if you drop the charges against my husband. Garrett turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You've been busy. I'm protecting my family, same as Ethan. He studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. All right, bring them in tomorrow. If their stories hold up, I'll talk to the judge. Claire's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. But it was a start, Ushiptikib. The next day, the 3 ranchers came to the marshal's office and gave their statements. Garrett listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When they were done, he called for his deputies and rode out to Bill Tucker's ranch. Clara waited at the marshal's office, her stomach in knots. 2 hours later, Garrett came back with Tucker in custody. The man's face was purple with rage, but he didn't say a word. Garrett went to the cells and unlocked Ethan's door. You're free to go. Ethan stepped out, his eyes finding Clara immediately. She ran to him and he caught her, holding her tight. What did you do? He asked quietly. What I had to. He pulled back, searching her face. Clara. Later, she said. Let's just go home. They walked out of the marshal's office together, and for the first time in days, Clara felt like she could breathe. Tars. That night, after Toby had gone to bed, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch. The stars were out, the air cool and still. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said. Yes, I did. You could have just let me sit in that cell, waited for the judge to sort it out. Clara looked at him. And what if he didn't? What if Tucker's money talked louder than the truth? Ethan didn't have an answer to that. I'm not going to stand by and watch them destroy you, Clara said quietly. Not when I can do something about it. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and took her hand. Thank you. Clara's chest ached. She squeezed his hand back. You're welcome. They sat together under the stars, and for the first time since they'd gotten married, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. But okay turned out to be harder than Clara had hoped. Bill Tucker was arrested and charged with fraud and theft, but the damage he'd done to their reputation didn't disappear overnight. The town still whispered. People still stared. And even though the Tucker boys left Toby alone after their father was locked up, The weight of everything that had happened hung over the ranch like smoke that wouldn't clear. A week after Ethan came home, Clara found him sitting on the edge of his bed in the middle of the afternoon, staring at nothing. She'd come in to put away laundry and stopped in the doorway when she saw him. "Ethan?" He didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." He rubbed his face with both hands. I keep thinking about what could have happened. If you hadn't done what you did, if those ranchers hadn't talked, I'd still be in that cell. Tucker would have won." Clara set down the laundry and sat beside him. "But that's not what happened. Only because you put yourself at risk. You went around town asking questions, making enemies. What if Tucker had come after you instead?" "He didn't." "But he could have." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes dark with something that looked like fear. "You could have gotten hurt, and it would have been my fault." Claire's chest tightened. "It wasn't your fault. None of this was. I started that fight in the street because he insulted me. And look where it got us." Ethan stood, pacing to the window. "Maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm just dragging you down with me." Clara stood too, anger flaring in her chest. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Don't you dare stand there and tell me I made a mistake marrying you. Don't you dare." Ethan turned, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. "Clara, I chose this. I chose you. And I chose to fight for this family when you couldn't." She stepped closer, her voice shaking. "So don't insult me by acting like I'm some helpless victim who didn't know what she was getting into. I knew exactly what I was doing." Ethan stared at her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he exhaled hard and sank back onto the bed. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be married to someone who sees me like this. Weak. Broken." Clara sat beside him again, slower this time. "I don't see you as weak." "Then you're not paying attention." "No, you're not." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You stood up to the entire town for me. You went to jail rather than back down. You protected Toby even when it cost you everything. That's not weakness, Ethan. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen anyone do." His throat worked, and she saw the shine of unshed tears in his eyes. "I miss her. My wife. I miss knowing what to do, how to be. And I feel like I'm betraying her every time I look at you and don't feel completely lost." Clara's heart cracked open. "You're not betraying her." "How do you know?" "Because loving someone doesn't mean you stop living when they're gone. It means you carry them with you while you keep going." She squeezed his hand. "She'd want you to be happy, Ethan. She'd want Toby to be happy. And if I can help with that, even a little, then that's enough for me." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "You're remarkable. You know that?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs doing." "No, you're doing more than that. He stopped, searching for the words. "You're giving me a reason to keep trying, and I don't think you realize how much that means." Clara's eyes stung. She turned her face away, blinking hard. "I'm not that special." "Yeah, you are." Ethan reached up and gently turned her face back toward his. "And one of these days, you're going to believe it." They sat there, hands clasped, and Clara felt something settle in her chest, something warm and fragile and terrifying. She was falling in love with him, maybe had been for weeks, and she had no idea what to do about it. 2 days later, Ellen Harper showed up at the ranch with a basket of preserves and a concerned expression. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the wagon pull up. "Ellen, this is a surprise." Ellen climbed down, smoothing her skirts. "I heard what happened with Bill Tucker. Wanted to check on you." "We're managing." "Are you?" Ellen's gaze was sharp but kind. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." Clara's hand stilled on the clothesline. "I'm fine." "Clara." Ellen stepped closer. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know what it's like to feel like you're one mistake away from losing everything." Clara's throat tightened. "Do you?" "I do. When my husband and I first came to Cowboy Flats, people treated us like outsiders. We didn't have money, didn't have connections. The preacher was just starting out, and half the congregation wanted him gone. Ellen paused. It took years before we felt like we belonged. And even now, there are people who look at us sideways. Clara looked at her. How did you survive it? By refusing to let them define us. By building a life that mattered, even when they said it didn't. Ellen reached out and touched Clara's arm. You're doing the same thing, and it's working. People are starting to see it. Are they? Some of them, the ones who matter. Ellen smiled. You saved Ethan's life. You protected his son. You stood up to Bill Tucker when no one else would. That counts for something. Clara wanted to believe her, but the doubt was still there, gnawing at her. What if it's not enough? She asked quietly. Ellen's expression softened. Then you keep going anyway, because that's what people like us do. We don't give up just because the road's hard. Clara nodded, her eyes burning. Ellen squeezed her arm once more, then climbed back into her wagon and drove off. Clara stood in the yard, the laundry forgotten, and let herself cry. Not because she was sad, but because someone had finally told her she was doing the right thing, and she hadn't realized how much she needed to hear it. Dink. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, her mind turning over everything Ellen had said. She thought about Ethan, about the way he'd looked at her that afternoon, about the way her heart had twisted when he'd called her remarkable. She got up and padded to the doorway of Ethan's room. The door was cracked open, and she could see him lying on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes. Ethan? She whispered. He lowered his arm, turning his head toward her. Clara? You all right? Can we talk? He sat up, nodding. Clara stepped inside and closed the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. What's on your mind? Ethan asked. Clara took a shaky breath. I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to take it. His expression grew serious. Okay. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and raw. Ethan stared at her, his face unreadable. Clara, I know you're not ready for that, she said quickly. I know you still love your wife, and I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I needed you to know, because I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. I don't know if I can give you what you deserve. I'm not asking for everything, I'm just asking for honesty. He nodded slowly. Then here's the truth. I care about you. More than I thought I could. And when I think about my future, I see you in it. But I don't know if that's love or just needing you. And I don't want to hurt you by promising something I'm not sure I can deliver. Clara's heart ached, but she appreciated the honesty. Then don't promise. Just be here. That's all I need. Ethan's eyes searched hers. You're sure? I'm sure. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. Clara leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dark. And when Clara finally pulled away and went back to her cot, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The next morning, Toby announced at breakfast that he wanted to go fishing. Fishing? Ethan repeated, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, there's a creek about a mile west. Some of the boys at school were talking about it. Toby looked between his father and Clara. Can we go? All of us? Clara glanced at Ethan, who shrugged. Why not? We could use a day off. So they packed a lunch and walked to the creek, Toby running ahead while Ethan and Clara followed at a slower pace. The day was warm but not stifling, the sky a clear, brilliant blue. When they reached the creek, Toby waded in immediately, laughing as the cold water soaked his boots. Ethan and Clara sat on the bank, watching him. He's happy, Clara said. Yeah, he is. Ethan glanced at her. Because of you. Clara shook her head. Because of us. They spent the afternoon there, Toby catching 3 small fish that he was absurdly proud of. Clara taught him how to clean them, and Ethan built a fire to cook them. They ate sitting on the creek bank, the fish charred and smoky, and the best thing Clara had tasted in months. As the sun started to sink, Toby fell asleep against Clara's shoulder. She stroked his hair absently, her gaze drifting to Ethan. This is good, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, then at Toby, then back at her. Yeah, it is. For a moment they just sat there, the 3 of them together, and Clara let herself believe that maybe this was enough. Maybe they didn't need the town's approval or a love story that fit some perfect mold. Maybe they just needed this, each other, and the life they were building, messy and imperfect as it was. But the peace didn't last. A week later, Clara was in town buying supplies when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two men were standing outside the saloon talking in low voices. One of them was a rancher she didn't recognize. The other was the store owner she'd spoken to weeks earlier. Heard Tucker's lawyers trying to get the charges dropped, the rancher was saying. Claims the witnesses were coerced. By who? The Hale woman says she threatened them if they didn't testify. Clara's heart stopped. She stepped closer, staying out of sight. That's ridiculous, the store owner said. She didn't threaten anyone. I was there when she talked to some of them. Doesn't matter. Tucker's got money for a good lawyer. If he convinces the judge, Ethan Hale's going back to jail, and this time he won't get out. Clara didn't wait to hear more. She ran to the wagon, climbed up, and drove back to the ranch as fast as the horse would go. Ethan was in the barn when she arrived. She jumped down from the wagon and ran to him. We have a problem. He looked up from the saddle he was mending. What kind of problem? Clara told him what she'd heard. Ethan's face went pale, then hard. They can't do that. They're going to try. Ethan threw the saddle down, pacing. This is insane. Those ranchers came forward on their own. Tucker's claiming I forced them. And if the judge believes him, then I'm done. Ethan stopped pacing, his hands balling into fists. And so are you. They'll run you out of town for interfering with the law. Clara's chest tightened. So what do we do? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, We fight again. How? I don't know yet. But I'm not going back to that cell. And I'm not letting them destroy you. Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear was a living thing inside her chest, cold and suffocating. That night, Ethan rode into town and came back with the marshal. Garrett looked grim as he dismounted. I heard you wanted to talk, he said. Yeah, Ethan gestured toward the house. Let's go inside. They sat at the kitchen table, Clara pouring coffee while Ethan laid out the situation. Garrett listened, his expression unreadable. Tucker's lawyer filed a motion yesterday, he said when Ethan finished. Judge is reviewing it now. And? Clara asked. And if he grants it, the case gets thrown out. Tucker walks free, and the charges against Ethan get reinstated. Clara's stomach turned. Can we fight it? You can try, but you'd need proof that the witnesses weren't coerced. They weren't, Clara said. I asked them questions. I didn't threaten anyone. Can you prove that? Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. The store owner was there, Clara said. He heard some of the conversations. Garrett nodded slowly. That might help, but it's still your word against Tucker's lawyer, and juries tend to believe lawyers. So we're screwed, Ethan said flatly. Not necessarily. Garrett leaned forward. There's one other option. If you can find something on Tucker, something that proves he's been lying all along, the judge might throw out his motion. Like what? Records, ledgers, anything that shows he was skimming from the cattle sales. Ethan's jaw tightened. Where would we even start looking? His ranch? His office? Somewhere he'd keep his business records. Clara's pulse quickened. You're saying we should break into his property? I'm saying, Garrett said carefully, that if evidence happened to turn up, I'd be obligated to investigate. Where it came from wouldn't matter as much as what it proved. Ethan and Clara stared at him. Garrett stood, draining his coffee. I didn't hear anything tonight, and if I were you, I'd be very careful about what you do next. He left, and Clara and Ethan sat in silence. He's telling us to break the law, Clara said. Yeah. Are we really considering this? Ethan looked at her, his eyes hard. If it's the only way to keep our family safe? Yeah, I am. Clara's hands trembled. What if we get caught? Then we get caught, but at least we tried. Clara took a shaky breath. Okay, then let's do it. Bucket. They spent the next 2 days planning. Ethan scouted Tucker's ranch, watching the comings and goings, figuring out when the house would be empty. Clara asked around town carefully, trying to learn where Tucker kept his records. On the third night, they made their move. They left Toby with Ellen, telling her they had business in town. Then they rode to Tucker's ranch, arriving just after midnight. The house was dark, the barn quiet. Ethan tied the horses a ways off, and they crept toward the main building. Claire's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Ethan tried the door. Locked. He pulled a knife from his belt and worked the latch until it clicked open. Inside, the house was silent. They moved quickly, searching the main room, the kitchen, a small office near the back. Claire's hands shook as she rifled through drawers, finding receipts and letters and nothing useful. Then Ethan called softly from the office. "Clara, come here." She hurried over. He was holding a leather-bound ledger, flipping through pages covered in numbers and names. "This is it," he said. "Look, he's been recording 2 sets of numbers, one for the buyers, one for himself. He's been pocketing the difference for years." Clara's breath caught. "We need to take this. If we do, he'll know someone broke in. Then we copy it, fast." They found paper and a pencil and started copying the most damning pages, their hands moving frantically. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, every creak of the house making her jump. They were halfway done when they heard a noise outside. Ethan froze. "Someone's coming." Clara's blood went cold. They shoved the ledger back where they'd found it, grabbed the copied pages, and ran for the back door. They slipped outside just as the front door opened, voices echoing through the house. They ran for the horses, not stopping until they were a mile away. Only then did Ethan pull up, both of them gasping for breath. "Did we get it?" Clara asked. Ethan held up the pages, his face grim. "We got it." Oh. The next morning, they brought the copied ledger pages to Marshal Garrett. He looked them over, his expression growing darker with each line. "This is enough," he said. "I can reopen the investigation, and if Tucker's lawyer tries to claim coercion again, I'll have proof he's been lying all along." Clara sagged with relief. "So the charges against Ethan get dropped?" "They should. I'll talk to the judge this afternoon." Ethan shook his head, almost laughing. "I can't believe that worked." Garrett looked at him sharply. "I don't know where you got these pages, and I don't want to know. But if anyone asks, you tell them you found them in your barn. Some old records Tucker left behind years ago. Understand?" "Understood." Garrett tucked the pages into his desk. "Now get out of here, and stay out of trouble." They left the marshal's office and climbed into the wagon. Clara looked over at Ethan, and suddenly they were both laughing, exhausted, relieved, half-hysterical laughter that made her sides ache. "We did it," she said. "Yeah, we did." They rode home, and for the first time in months, Clara felt like maybe the worst was behind them. But there was still one more thing she had to face. That evening, as the sun set, Clara walked out to the small cemetery plot behind the house. Ethan's wife was buried there beneath a simple wooden cross. Clara stood at the grave, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd never done this before. Never felt like she had the right. But she did now. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said quietly. "But I need to say this. I didn't come here to replace you. I didn't come here expecting anything. But your husband, he saved me. And your son, he's become part of my heart. And I want you to know that I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to love them the best way I know how. And I hope that's okay with you." The wind rustled through the trees, and Clara felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She turned to leave and found Ethan standing a few yards away, watching her. She didn't know how long he'd been there. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. "You weren't." He walked over, standing beside her. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd take care of you, both of you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She would have liked you." Clara's throat tightened. "You think so?" "I know so." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "And I think she'd be glad I found you, or you found me. However it happened." Clara looked up at him, and the expression on his face made her heart skip. "Ethan, I love you," he said. The words came out rough, like he'd been holding them back too long. "I didn't think I could. Didn't think I had it in me anymore. But I do. And it's different from what I had with her, but it's real. And I need you to know that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too." He pulled her into his arms and she clung to him, her face pressed against his chest. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Clara felt something shift inside her, something that had been broken for so long, finally starting to heal. A week later, the judge dismissed all charges against Ethan. Bill Tucker was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His ranch was sold to pay off his debts, and his sons left town. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they quieted, and slowly people in Cowboy Flats started to see Clara and Ethan differently. Not as scandalous outsiders, but as people who'd fought for their family and won. Ellen Harper invited them to Sunday dinner. The blacksmith tipped his hat when he saw them in town. Even the store owner started giving them fair prices again. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a start. One evening, Clara and Ethan stood on the ridge overlooking their land. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Toby was down by the barn, playing with a stray dog that had wandered onto the property and decided to stay. "You ever think about leaving?" Clara asked. "Starting over somewhere new?" Ethan shook his head. "No, this is home, for better or worse." "Even with everything that happened?" "Especially because of everything that happened." He looked at her. "We built something here, something real, and I'm not giving that up." Clara leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "What do you think comes next?" "I don't know, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." Clara smiled. Together. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, and Clara thought about how far she'd come. From a woman stepped off a train with nothing but a carpet bag and a limp, rejected and alone, to this: a partner, a home, a family. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been smooth. There had been pain and fear and moments when she'd thought about running. But she'd stayed, and that had made all the difference. Because the truth was, strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and putting yourself back together. It was about standing up when the world tried to knock you down. It was about choosing to fight for the people you loved, even when the fight seemed impossible. And Clara had learned something else too. That love wasn't always the sweeping, cinematic kind. Sometimes it was quiet and hard-won. Sometimes it was built on partnership and respect, and showing up every day, even when it hurt. Sometimes it was choosing someone, over and over again, until that choice became the foundation of everything. She looked up at Ethan, and he looked down at her, and she saw her future reflected in his eyes. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and worth every single step it had taken to get here. Toby called out from the barn, asking if they wanted to come see the dog's new trick. Ethan laughed and called back that they'd be right there. Clara took one last look at the sunset, then turned toward the ranch, toward home, and walked down the ridge with the man she loved. Behind her, the sky blazed with color. Ahead of her, the lights of the house glowed warm and welcoming. And somewhere in between, Clara Hale finally understood what it meant to belong. Not because someone had given her permission, not because a town had decided she was worthy, but because she'd claimed it for herself, because she'd fought for it, bled for it, refused to give up on it even when giving up would have been easier. She'd walked into the desert broken and alone, and she'd come out the other side whole. Not because her scars had disappeared, but because she'd learned to wear them like armor. And that, she thought, was the kind of strength that lasted, the kind that couldn't be taken away, the kind that changed everything.